we don't need to dwell on it, but we don't forget it, because that's what made us who we are, and that's what made our elders who they are.
Tonight, racism in the classroom at Truro Junior High.
It took 40 years, but a life sentence was handed down to the man who killed 12-year-old Monica Jack.
And the nominees are in for this year's Juno Awards. Good evening, welcome to APTN National News. I'm Dennis Ward.
And I'm Melissa Ridgen.
A junior high school in Nova Scotia says it does not tolerate racism. And a substitute teacher's assistant recently found out the school is serious.
He made comments about residential schools to his grade 7 class, which the students immediately reported. Angel Moore has the story.
Truro Junior High is a culturally diverse school with students from town and surrounding First Nations. So, when an educator made racist remarks, everyone was shocked. JC Sillyboy was in that classroom. Her family attended residential schools.
We're reading through the textbooks, and the sub was telling us that as natives, we need to forgive and forget what happened in the residential schools to make our future better. And he kept making comments like that.
Parents were immediately called to meet with school officials. Jolene Marr says she's impressed the school acted quickly and is working with parents to combat racism. She says education is key so people can understand what Indigenous people have endured.
I was glad that when I came to the school, the gentleman was already off the premises. More so because I probably would have liked to educate him myself.
The school board says they have programs to teach educators cultural sensitivity and to be respectful. And culturally hurtful comments are not tolerated and do not represent their values. The school's communications manager, Jennifer Rogers, says it was important to handle it swiftly.
To acknowledge the incident, to validate the students' feelings, and to restore trust and confidence and safety back in the school.
Students' courage to speak up is also bringing safety back into the school. Sillyboy says youth need to stand up to racism and know the true history of residential schools.
We don't need to forgive and forget. We don't need to dwell on it, but we don't forget it, because that's what made us who we are, and that's what made our elders who they are.
The substitute educational assistant is being dealt with by Human Resources, and the school administration is working with parents and students to move forward. Angel Moore, APTN National News, Truro, Nova Scotia.
The federal government has promised to end long-term drinking water advisories in First Nations communities and say they're making progress. However, some community members say they've lost count of how many times they've been under short-term boil water advisories. Ashley Branson brings us this.
Welcome to Shamattawa First Nation. This is just one community under a short-term boil water advisory for the past 2 months. Since December 6th, 2018, up to 5,000 people have been affected.
It's a boil water advisory, so we can't drink right from the tap. We have to boil our water just like many other communities in the north.
This First Nation is an isolated community located approximately 740 kilometers north of Winnipeg.
We typically get our water from the river if where we can't drink from the tap, but even then we boil our water every day from morning to night to bathe ourselves, to cook for our families. It's just unacceptable to live that way.
Prior to this last short-term advisory, Chief Eric Redhead says there was a long-term drinking water advisory 2 years ago. And since then, the community has been placed under a string of short-term water advisories.
I can't even count how many, to be honest with you.
The federal government says since January, 78 long-term boil water advisories have been lifted since November 2015. But since mid-January, there are 26 short-term drinking water advisories in place. In an email, a spokesperson for Indigenous Service Canada claims little responsibility for communities facing recurrent short-term advisories, but says the federal government continues to work closely to support sustainable First Nations-led approaches to addressing new and ongoing drinking water advisories. First Nations are the owners and operators of water and wastewater infrastructure in First Nation communities. Data about First Nations water and wastewater infrastructure belong to the First Nations that then choose to share data with Indigenous Service Canada.
We have a good operator back home. He checks it daily.
Redhead adds the data collected is kept in a logbook. According to one academic, Indigenous Service Canada is dropping the ball.
I think what we've seen in the 3 years that follow is how much those promises are very small in comparison to the scale of how serious those problems are. And that it's not often about simple sort of solutions like bringing in a water treatment plant.
Adele Perry is a history professor at the University of Manitoba.
I think this would be a moment where we can think about holding Indigenous Services Canada, accountable as best we are able as members of the public or of First Nations to make clear that this is something that is under their jurisdiction and that we expect that there to be some meaningful understanding and accounting of it.
According to the Indigenous Service Canada website, an additional $172.6 million has been proposed in the 2018 budget over 3 years to improve clean and safe drinking water on reserves and renovations of affected water systems. Ashley Branson, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Amnesty International is voicing concerns over accounts of alleged violence and abuse of Indigenous women at labor camps in northern Manitoba. The allegations have been trickling out over historic and ongoing abuses at Manitoba hydro projects. Amnesty says the stories it is hearing directly parallels a pattern of systemic violence the human rights organizations documented in 2016 at energy development work camps in northeast British Columbia. For more, we're joined by Amnesty's Jacqueline Hansen. Jacqueline, thanks for joining us. Can you speak to some of the parallels that you're seeing from Amnesty's previous work?
So previously, Amnesty did some research with community members in Northeast BC, looking at the social impacts, including the gender impacts of energy development on Indigenous peoples and on Indigenous women and girls in particular. And when we spoke to activists, community leaders, representatives from northern Manitoba, what we heard was a very similar pattern of impacts on women and girls, patterns of violence, of discrimination.
There were 30 recommendations by Amnesty that came out of that report. Will any of those recommendations apply here?
I think so. The recommendations we made from the BC report, some were targeted at the federal government, some at the provincial government, some at industry, some at police services. And many of those recommendations would absolutely apply to Manitoba, including, for example, one thing we did call for in the report that would be applicable is making sure that when there's assessments done in the approvals process for energy development projects, that there's gender-based analysis. So while looking at both the positive and the negative potential impacts of a project, make sure that you're looking at who is potentially impacted, what and how might different groups of people be impacted in different ways. This is a really great way to understand how gender and ethnicity play a role in understanding the patterns of impacts of these projects on people.
Jacqueline, we'll have to leave it there, but appreciate you taking some time for us.
Thank you.
The United Nations has condemned the Canadian and British Columbia governments for human rights violations. It's over Canada's approval and the ongoing construction of the Site C Dam project. Controversial at its outset, the mega hydroelectric generation project was started by the former BC Liberal government. APTN's Tina House has this.
This isn't the first time the United Nations Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination has called for construction to be stopped on the Site C Dam project just outside of Fort St. John, BC.
Continued construction of Site C Dam is a serious threat to our fundamental human rights as Indigenous people. And the Independent Expert Committee is now underlining the urgency of its recommendations from 2017 by issuing a new statement under the emergency procedure meant to prevent serious violations of human rights. And that's why it's so significant.
Construction of the Site C Dam project is well underway and expected to be completed at the end of 2025. This corporate video shows a work camp for 1,600 people. The estimated cost of the project was originally $9 billion, but in 2017, that cost soared to $10.7 billion and counting. Cookpie Judy Wilson also says that the provincial government is not upholding its commitment to the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples.
The UN Declaration has the minimum standards for. It's a global international instrument on human rights, and Horgan needs to back up his words, and he needs to be able to uphold those words as well, which he isn't doing by continuing the construction of Site C.
When asked about the federal government's reaction to the UN recommendations for the project to be halted, Minister of the Environment, Catherine McKenna, stands behind the government's decision.
The Site C, we monitor closely their conditions with respect to the project, and if ever there's a breach of the conditions, we act. Thank you.
Tina House, APTN National News, Vancouver.
We've got some news out of courts in Ontario and British Columbia.
Those stories are coming up after the break, but first, here's tomorrow's weather forecast.
On the east coast, we have -1 in mix of sun and cloud in St. John's, 3 and rain in Halifax, -28 and snow in Inukjuak, -13 in Happy Valley, Goose Bay, -10 for Saguenay and Quebec City and snow, -11 mix of sun and cloud in Montreal, -17 and sunny in Peterborough, -20 and sunshine in Windsor, snow and -28 in Big Trout Lake, 21 and snow in Thunder Bay, -21. Lots of sun up north in Manitoba, -33 in Churchill, -29 for Norway House and God's Lake, -27 and sunny in Winnipeg, -25 and sunshine in Brandon, -19 in snow in Saskatoon, -18 in snow in North Battleford, -25 in La Ronge, -18 in Meadow Lake, and -30 in Stony Rapids.
Welcome back. The family of Monica Jack have waited 40 years for justice. Now a 71-year-old man has been sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for 25 years. Gary Taylor Hanlon was convicted of first-degree murder for killing 12-year-old Monica Jack in 1978. She was just a child when Hanlon abducted her while she was riding her bike near her home just outside of Merritt, BC, and was put into the back of Hanlon's camper. Her brother later located her bike down a steep embankment near where she was last seen. Her body was found 17 years later on a mountain near where Hanlon attacked Jack. During sentencing, Justice Austin Cullen told Hanlon, "Your actions were certain to bring an innocent child terror and pain before her life was so savagely ended."
Adam Capé was serving a short sentence at the provincial jail in Thunder Bay for carrying a weapon, which was a baseball bat, vandalism, and breaching court orders by drinking. During that sentence, he was charged with the first-degree murder of the death of a fellow inmate, Sherman Cuesas. Capé went on to spend the next 4.5 years in solitary confinement. Yesterday, a judge in Thunder Bay stayed that murder charge and set Capé free. Our reporter Willow Fiddler has been following the case, and she joins us from Thunder Bay. So, Willow, Adam Capé made national headlines in 2016 after Ontario's Human Rights Commissioner met Capé in a Thunder Bay jail where he had been held in solitary confinement for 4 years. Why was he there?
Adam Capé was charged with first-degree murder after he allegedly killed 34-year-old Sherman Cuesas in June of 2012. Both men were in custody in the Thunder Bay Correctional Centre. Capé was scheduled for release in August of that year, and Cuesas was also scheduled for release just weeks after he died. So after Cuesas died, Capé was transferred to the Thunder Bay District Jail, where he would be held in segregation for the next 4.5 years. charged with first-degree murder. Capay filed to have his murder charge stayed because he believed his segregation violated sections of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And on Monday, a Thunder Bay court judge agreed with Capay, allowing him to walk out of the Thunder Bay courthouse a free man with his family. There is a publication ban in effect until next month, so we can't discuss reasons for the judge's decision right now.
Okay, and so what's been the reaction to this?
Well, the Cuisance family, of course, they had been hoping for justice in this case. They've gone through a lot of grief and loss of multiple family members since Sherman's death, so it's been very difficult on them. I spoke with Sherman's son, Tristan, this afternoon from Toronto. He said the judge's decision was a nightmare, but that he was also expecting this outcome. The family is from Niskandiga First Nation, which is a fly-in community north of Thunder Bay. The leadership issued a statement expressing their disappointment in the judge's decision as well. We've reached out to Capay's family. They're not ready at this time to talk to media. It's just been a very overwhelming time for everybody.
Yeah, well, and I guess there will be follows to be had out of this, but we can't say much more because of the publication ban now. Thank you so much for this update, Willow.
Thanks, Melissa.
To Nunavut now, where the community of Baker Lake is scrambling to provide water and sewage service to its 2,000 residents following a fire that gutted a municipal garage. Baker Lake is located in Nunavut's central Kivalliq region, and all the homes and businesses rely on trucked water and sewer service. This was the scene that Baker residents faced this morning as the community garage containing sewer trucks and heavy equipment burned. Residents are being asked to conserve water. Local schools and businesses are closed down, and according to the senior administrative officer, a plan is taking shape.
The current situation is the fire occurred, our 6-bay garage, I think, is a total write-off. We're going to need assistance getting those vehicles here, like via Hercules or something like that. We're going to need some method of getting vehicles here.
Time for a quick break, but when we come back, the Juno nominations are out.
We'll tell you about 5 Indigenous artists vying for an honor, and here's the rest of your weather. Off to northern Alberta, we have -15 in snow in Fort McMurray, -13 in snow in High Level. 4 and sunny in Calgary, -2 mix of sun and cloud in Medicine Hat. Sunshine in Vancouver and 7 degrees, Tofino's sunny and 9. -12 in snow in Fort Nelson, +8 in Sandspit. -13 in snow in Dawson City, -6 mix of sun and cloud in Whitehorse. Wati is snowing and -22, as is Yellowknife, -12 in snow in Big Trout Lake. Tuktoyaktuk is -20, as is Paulatuk, and in Nuvik, it's snowing there. -37 and clear in Cambridge Bay and Baker Lake, -36 in Repulse Bay. Pangatung's in at -24 and clear, -22 in Clyde River and also clear. Indigenous poets gather to share their works across Turtle Island, and they now have an outlet to do it in front of crowds in Edmonton. Here's Chris Stewart at their first open mic night.
But sing for the gift of love, because we all have it and it's vaster than the sky above.
Kelly Lalakwa founded the Edmonton chapter of the Indigenous Poets Society this month. So she was surprised to see over 100 people come out for their first open mic night.
It started off just as a community event, wanting to open up a space for different Indigenous artists to come and share their work, share their words, their stories.
She says all of the proceeds will go to support the Wet'suwet'en justice camps in British Columbia who are fighting against the Trans Mountain Pipeline.
I dream of an old Turtle Island, an impossible utopia. A place where water lives, from glaciers to oceans, sustaining all of our relations.
Several poets took to the stage to read their stories. Ty Thundering Antlers is angry with how he sees Mother Earth being abused for profit.
My anger stems from the deliberate actions of the people who created residential schools the deliberate actions of resource extraction companies and the deliberate actions of politicians, Canadian politicians, and also some Indigenous politicians to allow extractivism to occur on these lands.
The headliner was singer Chickwees, who says she enjoyed the opportunity to talk and tell stories from her new album instead of sing.
Since it's a poetry event, I am going to be doing a spoken word piece in Cree, and then I'll obviously provide the English portion as well. And then I'm going to go into a song that's called Dancing in the Northern Lights, and I do that partially in English and then in Cree. And that song is about, is an honor to missing and murdered Indigenous women.
The Society plans to have Indigenous Poetry Night every last Monday of each month here at the Aviary on 111 Avenue. Chris Stewart, APTN National News, Edmonton.
Nominations for this year's Juno Awards were released this morning, and 5 artists are in the running for Indigenous Album of the Year, and they're all looking pretty good. Here's Brittany Hobson with more.
Indigenous Music Album of the Year, presented by APTN.
The 5 artists nominated include classically trained tenor Jeremy Dutcher. The Maliseet singer combined his vocals with traditional Wallastoke songs from its ancestors for his debut album. Anishinaabe singer-songwriter Leonard Sumner scored his first nomination for his album Standing in the Light. Hyla rap duo Snotty Nose Rez Kids also picked up their first nomination for their album The Average Savage. Inuk singer Alyssa P. scored her second nomination for her latest album, The Ballad of the Runaway Girl. And Northern Cree, who originally won the award in 2007, are nominated for Brothers and Sister. The Juno Awards take place on March 17th in London, Ontario. Brittany Hobson, APTN National News.
That is some diverse talent in that category.
And some big names, Players Prize winner, Players Prize nominee. It's a great looking category.
Can't wait to see how it all shakes down. That's your news for this Tuesday. Tune in tomorrow to In Focus as we continue our series on exposing the inner workings of the CFS system. That's at 3 p.m. Eastern and 2 p.m. Central. I'm Melissa Ridgen.
And if you're looking for more Indigenous news, visit our website, aptnnews.ca. Don't turn the channel. A new episode of The Laughing Drum with Tim Fontaine is next. I'm Dennis Ward. Have a good night.